What happens when a legendary icon sits down expecting a celebration of her career, only to be blindsided by a host's cruel commentary about her appearance? You won't believe what unfolds when Jimmy Kimmel decides to make jokes about Cher using makeup to hide her age, sparking a confrontation that exposes his pattern of tearing down women on live television. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below because you're not going to believe what unfolds. Last night's episode of Jimmy Kimmel Live started like any other, with the familiar opening monologue and the usual studio audience settling into their seats. But what transpired during the interview segment would become one of the most explosive confrontations in late-night television history. Cher, the iconic singer and actress who has dominated entertainment for over 5 decades, had agreed to appear on the show to promote her latest project. What she didn't expect was to become the target of Kimmel's increasingly personal and inappropriate commentary. The trouble began even before Cher took her seat. As she walked onto the stage, radiant in a shimmering black ensemble that perfectly complemented her signature style, Kimmel's opening remarks immediately set an uncomfortable tone. Instead of the warm welcome typically reserved for A-list guests, he launched into what seemed like prepared material about her appearance. Well, well, look who's here, Kimmel began with that trademark smirk that his regular viewers know all too well. Cher, everybody. Looking absolutely well, let's just say the makeup department must have worked overtime tonight. The audience laughed nervously, unsure whether this was friendly banter or something more pointed. Cher's smile faltered for just a moment before she recovered, extending her hand for what should have been a gracious greeting. "Jimmy, always the charmer," she replied, her voice carrying just a hint of edge that suggested she wasn't entirely amused by his opening gambit. As she settled into the guest chair, Kimmel continued his commentary, seemingly oblivious to or deliberately ignoring the discomfort he was creating. "I mean, seriously, folks, when you've been in this business as long as Cher has, you learn all the tricks, don't you?" He continued, gesturing toward her face with an exaggerated wave of his hand. "The lighting, the angles, the what do they call it? Contouring? Is that what they're calling it these days?" The studio audience's laughter became more forced, and even some of Kimmel's regular supporters in the crowd seemed to sense that something was off about this particular interview. Cher, a consummate professional who has navigated decades of interviews with grace and wit, attempted to steer the conversation towards safer ground. "Well, Jimmy, I'm here to talk about my new documentary, which I think your audience would really enjoy." But Kimmel wasn't ready to let his chosen topic go. He interrupted her mid-sentence with another comment that made the tension in the room palpable. "Oh, come on, don't be modest. You've got to share your secrets with us. I mean, you're what, pushing 80 now? And yet here you are looking like you could still be touring with Sonny." The comment hung in the air like a toxic cloud. The audience fell completely silent, and even the cameramen seemed to shift uncomfortably behind their equipment. Cher's expression hardened, and for the first time in the interview, she looked directly into Kimmel's eyes with an intensity that could have cut glass. "Excuse me," she said quietly, her voice dropping to a tone that anyone who knew her well would recognize as a warning signal. "Did you just ask me about my age and makeup routine as your opening question?" The challenge in her voice was unmistakable, but Kimmel, either missing the cue entirely or choosing to ignore it, pressed forward with his line of commentary. "Hey, I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. You look great for your age, but let's be honest about the effort that goes into it. I mean, how long does it take you to get ready for something like this? 2 hours? 3? He leaned back in his chair with that self-satisfied expression that suggested he thought he was being clever, completely unaware that he had just crossed a line that many guests would consider unforgivable. The veteran entertainer took a deep breath, and those watching could see her making a calculated decision about how to respond. "Jimmy, I've been doing interviews since before you were born, and I have to say, this is a first. Are you seriously going to spend our time together talking about my makeup instead of my 5-decade career?" Her tone was measured but firm, and there was no mistaking the disappointment and growing anger beneath her words. Kimmel, perhaps sensing that he was losing control of the interview but unwilling to back down, doubled down on his approach. "Oh, come on, Cher, don't be so sensitive. It's a compliment. I'm saying you look fantastic. But you've got to admit, There's some serious artistry happening here, he said, making a circular motion around his own face as if to indicate hers. I mean, this isn't exactly the face that sang gypsies, tramps, and thieves, is it? The gasps from the audience were audible now, and even some of Kimmel's production crew could be seen shaking their heads in the background. What had started as inappropriate commentary had now crossed into territory that felt deeply personal and cruel. Cher's hands gripped the arms of her chair, and her legendary composure was beginning to crack under the sustained assault on her appearance and dignity. "I cannot believe what I'm hearing right now," she said, her voice rising slightly, but still maintaining a level of control that spoke to her decades of professionalism. "Is this really what you think constitutes entertainment? Making fun of a woman's appearance? Reducing my entire career to a discussion about whether I look old enough for your liking?" The questions hung in the air, and for a moment, it seemed like Kimmel might recognize the severity of his mistake and attempt to course correct. Instead, he made the situation exponentially worse. "Look, I'm not trying to be mean here, but let's be real. This is Hollywood, and appearance matters. You've built a career partly on your look, so it's fair game to talk about how you maintain it. I'm just curious about the process. How much work are we talking about here? Botox? Fillers? I mean, the audience wants to know." His casual dismissal of her concerns and his continued focus on her appearance had now transformed what should have been a celebratory interview into something that felt more like an interrogation. The legendary performer's eyes flashed with a mixture of hurt and rage that anyone familiar with her fierce reputation would recognize as dangerous territory. She had built her career not just on her talent and beauty, but on her refusal to be diminished or dismissed by men who thought they could tear her down. And Jimmy Kimmel was about to learn that lesson the hard way. "Fair game?" she repeated, her voice now carrying the full weight of 5 decades of fighting against exactly this kind of treatment. "My appearance is fair game for your amusement? Let me tell you something, Jimmy." But as she began to speak, Kimmel made perhaps the most catastrophic decision of the entire interview. He cut her off again, this time with a comment that would push the situation past the point of no return. Hey, calm down there, Grandma," he said with a dismissive wave of his hand, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "No need to get all worked up. I'm just having some fun here." The studio fell into a deathly silence that seemed to stretch on forever. Even the usually reliable audience members who laughed at everything seemed frozen in shock. The word "grandma" hung in the air like a bomb that had just exploded, and everyone in the room knew that something irreversible had just happened. Cher's face went through a transformation that was both mesmerizing and terrifying to witness. The hurt that had been building behind her eyes crystallized into something much more dangerous, pure, unadulterated fury. She sat up straighter in her chair, and when she spoke, her voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Did you just call me Grandma?" The question was delivered with such icy precision that several audience members actually shuddered. Kimmel, finally seeming to realize that he had crossed a line he couldn't uncross, attempted damage control, but his efforts only made things worse. "Look, I didn't mean it like that. It's just an expression. You know, like, you're a veteran, a legend. I was trying to be endearing." His voice trailed off uncertainly, and the sweat beginning to form on his forehead was visible even under the studio lights. "Endearing?" Cher's voice rose an octave, and the legendary performer, who had commanded stages around the world for decades, was now channeling all of that power into her response. "You think calling a woman grandma on national television is endearing? You think making jokes about my age and my appearance and then dismissing my objections is endearing?" She leaned forward in her chair, and Kimmel actually recoiled slightly. The host tried to regain control of the situation, but his attempts were clumsy and tone-deaf. "Cher, please, let's just take a breath here. I think you're overreacting a little bit. This is supposed to be fun, remember? Light entertainment." His words only served to pour gasoline on an already raging fire. Overreacting. The word came out of Cher's mouth like a missile. "Jimmy, let me educate you about something since you clearly need the lesson. I have been in this business since 1965. I have sold over 100 million records worldwide. I have won an Academy Award, a Grammy, an Emmy, and 3 Golden Globes. I have survived decades of men like you trying to reduce me to nothing more than my appearance. And I am not about to sit here and let you disrespect me on your little show." The power in her voice was undeniable, and even Kimmel seemed to shrink in his chair as she continued. "You want to talk about my face? Let's talk about it. This face has been kissed by fans on 6 continents. This face has graced magazine covers for 50 years. This face has looked into cameras and told stories that have moved millions of people to tears, to laughter, to joy. And you think you have the right to sit there and make jokes about it like some amateur comedian at a strip club?" Kimmel's face had gone pale, and his usual cocky demeanor was nowhere to be found. "Cher, I really think we should just move on. Maybe we got off on the wrong foot here." But Cher was far from finished. "Oh no, Jimmy, we're not moving on. We're going to finish this conversation that you started." Her eyes blazed with an intensity that made it impossible to look away. "You see, this isn't just about me. This is about every woman who has ever been made to feel like her worth is tied to how young she looks or how much makeup she's wearing. This is about every actress who's been told she's too old for roles while men your age are still playing romantic leads. This is about a culture that thinks it's acceptable to tear women down for entertainment." The audience was completely riveted now, hanging on every word. Some were nodding in agreement, while others looked uncomfortable, as if they were witnessing something they weren't supposed to see. The camera operators kept their equipment trained on both participants, knowing they were capturing television history in the making. Kimmel made another desperate attempt to salvage the situation. "I understand you're upset, and I apologize if I offended you. That wasn't my intention. Can we please just—" But Cher cut him off with a gesture that left no room for argument. "Your intention," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "Jimmy, your intention was to get laughs at my expense. Your intention was to make me the butt of your jokes so your audience would think you're clever. Your intention was to diminish me, to make me smaller, so you could feel bigger. And you know what? That says everything about you and nothing about me." The host was now visibly squirming in his seat, and his production team could be seen frantically gesturing from behind the cameras, though whether they were signaling for him to continue or cut to commercial was unclear. "Cher, please, I really am sorry. I never meant to." "Never meant to what? Never meant to be a misogynist on live television? Never meant to show your audience exactly what kind of man you really are?" Cher's words were like surgical strikes, each one finding its target with devastating precision. "Because that's what this is, Jimmy. This isn't comedy. This isn't entertainment. This is misogyny, pure and simple." The accusation hung in the air like a thunderclap, and Kimmel's face flushed red with a mixture of embarrassment and anger. For the first time in the interview, he seemed to find his voice again, but his response only made things worse. "Now wait just a minute. I am not a misogynist. I have daughters. I support women. I've had hundreds of female guests on this show, and nobody has ever called you out on it before," Cher interrupted, her voice steady and implacable. "That doesn't mean it hasn't been happening. It just means that most women in this industry are too afraid to speak up because they know it could hurt their careers. Well, guess what? I'm Cher. I don't need your show. I don't need your approval, and I sure as hell don't need to sit here and take your abuse." The tension in the studio was now so thick it was almost suffocating. Audience members were shifting uncomfortably in their seats, and the usual energy of a late-night talk show had been replaced by something much more serious and confrontational. This was no longer entertainment. This was a reckoning. Kimmel, perhaps sensing that his career was hanging in the balance, made one final attempt to turn the situation around. "Look, Cher, I think there's been a misunderstanding here. I respect you enormously. You're a legend, an icon. I would never intentionally disrespect you. Maybe we can start over." His voice had taken on a pleading quality that was almost pathetic to witness. But Cher was far from finished, and her next words would push the confrontation into its final, explosive phase. "Start over." Cher's laugh was sharp and bitter, cutting through the studio like broken glass. "Jimmy, you don't get to start over. You don't get to say those things and then pretend it never happened just because you're scared of the consequences. You want to know what respect looks like? It looks like treating your guests with dignity from the moment they walk through that door. It looks like celebrating their achievements instead of mocking their appearance. It looks like being a professional instead of a playground bully." Kimmel's face was now a mask of panic and barely controlled anger. The realization that this interview had spiraled completely out of his control was written across his features, and his next words revealed just how desperate he had become. You know what, Cher? Maybe you're right. Maybe I was out of line. But you're being pretty harsh here, too. I mean, this is live television. Can't we just? Harsh. The word exploded from Cher's lips with such force that it seemed to echo through the studio. You think I'm being harsh? Jimmy, you spent the first 10 minutes of this interview systematically attacking my appearance, my age, and my dignity. And you think I'm being harsh for defending myself? You called me grandma on national television. And you think I'm being harsh for calling you out on your misogyny. She stood up from her chair with a fluid grace that commanded every eye in the room. Even standing, she seemed to tower over the seated host, her presence filling the space with an energy that was both magnificent and terrifying. Let me tell you what harsh really looks like, Jimmy. Harsh is a young woman trying to make it in this industry and being told she's not pretty enough, not young enough, not thin enough. Harsh is watching talented actresses disappear from Hollywood the moment they turn 40, while men like you continue to get work well into their 70s. Harsh is having to smile and laugh along when men like you make jokes at our expense because speaking up might end our careers. The studio audience was completely silent now, many of them visibly moved by her words. Some had tears in their eyes, while others were nodding in recognition of truths they had never heard spoken so boldly on television before. This was no longer just a confrontation between two entertainers. It had become a moment of reckoning for an entire industry. But you know what the harshest thing of all is, Jimmy? Cher continued, her voice rising with passion and pain. The harshest thing is that there are young women watching this show right now who are learning that it's acceptable for men to treat them this way. They're learning that their value is tied to their appearance, that their worth diminishes with age, that they should just smile and take it when men like you decide to tear them down for entertainment. Kimmel opened his mouth to respond, but Cher wasn't finished. And that's why I'm not going to sit here and pretend this is okay. That's why I'm not going to laugh along with your jokes or play the good sport. Because every time a woman does that, every time we enable this behavior, we're teaching the next generation that it's acceptable. The host's face was now a deep shade of red, and whether it was from embarrassment or anger was impossible to tell. Cher, I think you're making this into something it's not. I make jokes about everyone. That's what I do. It's comedy. No, Jimmy. Cher's voice was steady and implacable. Comedy is supposed to bring joy, not tear people down. Comedy is supposed to unite us, not divide us. What you did tonight wasn't comedy. It was cruelty disguised as entertainment, and I won't be part of it. She turned toward the audience then, addressing them directly with the same commanding presence that had made her a star for 5 decades. To everyone watching at home, especially the young women, I want you to know that you are worth more than your appearance. You are worth more than your age. You are worth more than what men like this tell you you're worth. Don't let anyone diminish you. Don't let anyone make you feel small. And don't ever let anyone tell you that you're overreacting when you stand up for yourself. The applause started slowly, with just a few audience members clapping tentatively. But it grew quickly, spreading through the studio like wildfire until the entire audience was on their feet, giving Cher a standing ovation that seemed to go on forever. The sound was thunderous, filled with appreciation not just for her talent, but for her courage in speaking truth to power. Kimmel sat frozen in his chair, his face a mixture of shock and humiliation. The applause continued, and with each passing second, it became more clear that the audience's sympathy lay entirely with his guest. He had lost control of his own show, and there was no way to regain it. When the applause finally died down, Cher turned back to face him one last time. Jimmy, I came here tonight to talk about my work, to connect with fans, to share some stories, and maybe have a few laughs. Instead, you turned this into an attack on my dignity and my worth as a human being. I've been in this business long enough to know when someone is trying to tear me down, and I'm certainly not going to sit here and let it happen. She reached down and picked up her purse from beside the chair, her movements deliberate and dignified. You know what the saddest part is? You could have had a legendary interview tonight. You could have talked to me about my music, my movies, my Broadway shows, my activism. You could have learned something about persistence, about reinvention, about surviving in an industry that's constantly trying to write you off. Instead, you chose to focus on my makeup. Kimmel made one last desperate attempt to salvage something from the wreckage. Cher, please don't leave like this. We can fix this. We can edit it. We can edit it. Cher's eyebrows raised in disbelief. Jimmy, this is live television. You can't edit real life. You can't take back what you said any more than you can take back what you revealed about yourself tonight. The audience heard it all, and they'll remember it all. She slung her purse over her shoulder and looked directly into the camera, speaking to the millions of viewers watching at home. Thank you all for your support over the years. It means more to me than you'll ever know. Keep believing in yourselves, keep standing up for what's right, and never let anyone tell you that you don't matter. With that, she turned and walked toward the exit, her heels clicking against the studio floor with a rhythm that sounded almost like a funeral march for Kimmel's dignity. The audience erupted in applause again, even louder than before, as she made her way off the stage. Kimmel sat alone at his desk, the weight of what had just happened settling over him like a shroud. The cameras were still rolling, the audience was still clapping, and he was still the host of the show, but everything had changed. He had been exposed, humiliated, and educated all at the same time, and there was no going back that as Cher reached the edge of the stage. She paused and turned back one final time. "Oh, and Jimmy," she called out, her voice carrying clearly across the studio. "Next time you want to interview a legend, try showing some respect. You might learn something." And with that, she was gone, leaving behind a studio full of stunned silence, a host whose career would never be the same, and a moment of television that would be talked about for years to come. The confrontation was over, but its impact would resonate far beyond the walls of that studio, serving as a reminder that some people refuse to be diminished, no matter how hard others try to tear them down.